Okie dokie. So let's actually start using the API that the DOM gives us in order to be able to manipulate it. All right. So I've got some example HTML here, and it's nothing special. I got some divs, I got some p tags, but notice I have this div has an ID. These two divs have a class, and then I just left these p tags, excuse me, as they were. All right. So HTML by itself is lifeless and it does nothing. Okay, it just sits here and stares at you. I would like to add some interactivity to this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in JavaScript. I'm going to be able to do some stuff. So first thing I have to learn is to target different elements. All right, how do I actually get these elements so I can do something with them? Well, very nicely, the DOM gives us an API in order to be able to do those sorts of things. So we're going to learn some of them. All right, let's do some JavaScript. All right, so the first one we're going to learn is query selector. All right, so this is our JavaScript file, and let's just make a variable. I'm going to do let div tag. And this is just a variable name. You can call it potato. You can call it foffick. Like whatever you want to call it. Okay, it's just a variable name. All right, so we're going to have div tag equals document dot query select. Okay, query selector. Okay, document refers to the document object model, and this function, okay, is part of the document object model API. Query selector allows us to get the first element on the page that matches our criteria. So you're like, well, what do you mean by criteria? Well, you can target things on a page, right, by their ID, by their class, okay, by their tag. And query selector is really fun because we can do some really complicated things. But let's get the first like simple stuff going. So if we want to target something by its class, then inside you put a string and then you put an ID. Okay, so an ID will be with just like CSS, you do a hashtag, and then this ID is target specific ID. So I'll do that here. All right, so this is going to target the first thing on the page with the ID of target specific ID. I'm going to go ahead and console log the variable div tag so you can see what it actually looks like. All right, so this is all the JavaScript I've got so far. I do need to add the script to the HTML, so what I'm going to do is put a script tag here. And oops, I need to make a space there. And then source equals, and then point to my JS file. So that way the script will be linked to the HTML and will run. Okay, I'm going to make sure everything is saved. I'm going to go ahead and open up the console. All right, so here it is. Okay, that div. So we go back to HTML. I have on line 10 a div with an ID of target specific ID. And then in my JavaScript, I said, okay, I'm going to have this variable hold the first element on the page that matches this criteria. And it's an object. So remember we were talking about object-oriented programming, okay? So remember OOP, okay? Object-oriented programming, which this is a term you should definitely know, is we deal with everything as objects. So the examples I gave you earlier in the course were like dogs and cats and like concrete things. Well, web pages can be objects. It's a series of objects, okay, in a nested data structure. So if I think of each of these individual div tags as objects, then they have properties that I can get from them. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I've got my object. Here's my target specific ID. Okay, this favicon I don't care about. Okay, I'm going to hit this arrow here to look at all the properties of my object, and I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger. Oh my gosh, there's tons of stuff. So I bet you didn't realize that like your tags, all right, have a bunch of different properties. Most of them are null, okay, so it doesn't really matter. But it's got the ID, okay, it's got the inner HTML, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's got some text, okay, it's got child nodes, okay, is there anything under it? All right, so it's got a bunch of different properties. This is an object. So remember, like we're doing objects last week. You guys did like a lab with students. The students have like names and stuff like that. Then there's no difference between that and this. This is the HTML element. So I've gotten my target specific ID and I've targeted it. I got it now. Now I can do something with this element. So let's actually do what we came here to do. So I've got my div tag and you're like, well, what do you want to do with it, right? Like, let's go ahead and change it. Let's change the inner HTML to, I don't know, let's say, the metaverse is coming for you. Do you see what's happening? Look as I'm typing. I took this tag right here, which is on line 10, and I had put something already on line 10 to say, hey there. Okay, the inner HTML already said, hey there. In JavaScript, I am literally changing it right now by changing the property of this object. Okay, I took this div, turned it into an object, and then once it's an object, I have access to its properties. And so one of its properties is inner HTML, and now I can just change the text to whatever I want. So this is what I mean by interactivity, right? Because HTML is static. I put this here, that's what's there. JavaScript allows us to add some, like, hey, I'd like to change things around a little bit. I don't want things to look the same. I want things to look a little bit different. I want to be able to change text on the fly. I want to be able to change colors. This is what I'm talking about. So it's going to follow the same basic flow, right? So the first thing you're going to do is find the element or elements on the page you want to interact with. Okay. Then you're going to manipulate their properties, okay, to your whims. Okay, once you've got the div tag, you can do what you want with it. You can turn it blue. You can change its text. You can show it or hide it, which we'll get into a little bit. But you can do a lot of different things with these tags, with these objects. The first thing I do though is be able to find them. So query selector is great. So query selector works with IDs. It works with classes. So for example, we've got example class here. Now remember, query selector will get the first element that it finds. So it will not get multiple, it will get the first. Let's say we're trying to look for elements that have the class example class. So let example class tags, we'll tag, in this case it's singular, document.query selector dot, okay, remember from CSS, the dot is for class. So it'll go through and it will look for the div with the class. And then let's go ahead and change the inner HTML of this too. Why not? It's equal to another example. See how it changed? See as I'm typing it changes? Okay, but it doesn't do the second one, right? So this was target by class. Let's make it target by class 2 so it's clearer. But you see how it changed this one, right? So this got changed. So originally it said target by class, but now it says this got changed. So look how query selector was able to get the first element that it found, for example, class, but it left the second element alone, right? So it's going to find this one first, and then that's it. It takes it. But you might be thinking to yourself, what if I want both of these? What if I want all things on the page with the class of this? And that's why you would use a class anyway, right? So that's fine. We're going to use a different function in the API. We're going to do query selector all. All right, so query selector all will get all of the elements. But then this is no longer a single element. Okay, so this is the thing you got to understand. Now this is multiple elements, right? Example class tag, this variable is now multiple elements. So it's an array. So I can now use it just like an array. So I can say example class tag bracket 0. And now I can change the inner HTML of this one. Its second element, it's got two elements in there. So if I do this, you see how that changed? This is the first element in the array. This is the second element. Okay, so now example class is an array of elements. Okay, so their order is in the order of the tree. So the tree will tell you which one will find it first and which one second. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you just want all of them or you're going to loop through them. All right, but this is the way you can get things by class. So query selector all, okay, will get all of the things with that class. So it's query selector is very useful. These are the basic ideas of what you can do with it. You can be even more specific with it. We'll get into more advanced examples with this, but this is the basic idea of what you need to get in order to target things on the page to be able to update them. Now, there's some other functions I want to let you know about. So there's also document dot get element by ID, which, I mean, it does exactly what the function says it does. You get a thing by an ID. You don't need the hashtag, so I can just do target specific ID. I just put a string in here without the hashtag, and it will get an element by its ID. You know, spoiler alert. There's also document that get element by class name. Okay, so you can put example class. Again, no need for the dot or the hashtag. One of the common things that beginners make a mistake with is with query selector, you need like the hashtag or the dot or the other like stuff that you would use for CSS, because query selectors can be used for like classes or IDs. It needs to know how you want to target it. If you're like want to be specific, get element by ID is very specific, right? Like you're looking at the ID. I don't need for you to tell me which one it is. You get that by the function itself. So you can use get element by ID or get elements by class name, okay, and they do the same thing. Okay, at the end of the day, they're the same thing. You pick the one you want to do, but this helps you define those elements on the page and grab them and turn them into objects. Once they're into objects, you can do what you want with them, and we're going to learn in the next video about like what you can actually do with the properties of these objects.